Yo, partnership alert, partnership alert, partnership alert. Living Corporate has a partnership with LinkedIn Learning, an American massive open online course provider that provides video courses taught by industry experts across a wide array of subjects. Now, the partnership is because Living Corporate has courses on LinkedIn Learning focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion for leaders, career professionals, and anyone really looking to upskill themselves and be better allies. So make sure you check out our courses on LinkedIn Learning by clicking the link in the show notes. And let's just say you don't want to do that. When you go to LinkedIn Learning on LinkedIn, search Living Corporate. We'll be right there. All right? Peace.
Good evening. Welcome to Living Corporate and the Thursday edition of The Access Point. So glad to have you join us again for another week of great conversation and great insight. Let me start off by telling you about who we are. Living Corporate is a digital media network consultancy focused on workplace equity and inclusion. Living Corporate centers and amplifies Black and Brown voices in the workplace through digital media production and business-to-business consulting. The network offers a variety of programming, and tonight we're excited that you join us for our latest installment of The Access Point. The Access Point is a weekly webinar focused on preparing Black and Brown college students and early career professionals for the workforce by having the real nuanced talks they don't know they need. For this Thursday night iteration of the show, we focus more closely on the real challenges that you, our viewers and listeners, are facing as you move through the early stages of your career. So we welcome your stories, experiences, and questions, and look forward to equipping you with the strategies to mitigate these challenges. Must give you a disclaimer. The thoughts and views expressed in tonight's discussion do not reflect the views of any organization with which the host may be affiliated. So now let's go into introductions. Tonight is just me and the great Wendy Edmonds. Why don't you kick it off, Wendy? Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Wendy M. Edmonds. I am an author, consultant, love talking about toxic followership. And I tell you what, your job is your treasure. I help you separate the gems from the counterfeits.
Gems from counterfeits. I wish I had that when I was just going to college. So I am Dr. Lonnie Morris, and like Dr. Edmonds, I am a management consultant and professor. Spend my time helping people who are at very critical points in their career understand organizational issues, unpack them, and seek resolution and figure out resolution. So I was happy to be here as always. And I'm excited about this week's episode for so many reasons. I was reading, and I read one thing in the New York Times about this, and then I actually saw multiple things in multiple publications talking about how people are afraid of this new generation coming into the workforce. And so it's amusing and it's sort of intriguing. But talked about how there's such this divide among the generations. So there's words in there like war and describes this tension because we got 4 different generations of people and their own values that exist in the workplace at any given time. So I'm thinking as we peel back the onion a bit around this, we're seeing really that people are working through different philosophies about work from each generation in the workplace, thinking about how baby boomers expect, what they expect in the workplace, what Gen X folks think, millennials, and now this group of the Gen Z folks. So if we think about this, there are some segments in the workforce that speak to the differences all the time. So we know about historical, social, political, and economic differences. And those really define how people see work and see what work should look like and how work should be approached. What do you think, Wendy?
I think you're right. It actually takes me back to my time of myself being the millennial entering into the workplace. And some of the experiences, there was this thought that because of a certain age, that perhaps I was not going to be loyal to the company. But this was also during a time where the IT industries were sucking up each other. They were merging, and So you can go in one day, be laid off the next. It was very easy. But one thing that I did do is, though it was seemed as not being loyal because you were not planning on being there for 20 years and retiring, I kept up my skill sets as a millennial. I kept up my certifications in the IT industry, and that made me marketable. So moving around was just what I did. It didn't matter what the reason was. That's just what I did.
And that's interesting because moving around was a different expectation, a sort of norm in that generation than the generations prior. So what I saw in all these articles talked about sort of these expectations of not having an 8-hour workday. So can I clock out when my work is done? I know this task will take me about 4 hours, and then can I go home? And if the CEO was a team player, how can we assign a CEO a task? Since you're on the team, let's put you on the team and put you to work, right? Can I get days off for mental health? And I was just talking to someone just this week who's been working for about a decade at a major automobile company and says, hey, we've got some folks in this Gen Z generation who are in our office and are very adamant and consistent with taking days off for what's perceived and for them as mental health days. And say, I've got somebody who's in our shop who's probably taken off about 30 days for mental health. And so there's some issues and challenges and thoughts around that, but being very transparent that this is a need that I have and a value that I have, and expectation is that the workplace will accommodate that and that no one looks at it in with a side eye.
Even for me, I will say I did some of that, not really take off, but I did push the envelope. I was the one who hated that DMV commute. In the DC area, it's at least an hour and a half to go anywhere. And that was a challenge. And so when I interviewed with a traditionalist, and I thought this was the second interview. This is good. And when we're sitting there having this conversation, I asked for 3 days to work from home. And I was met
How
with...
How dare you?
I know. Shocked face that said, you are quite precedent setting, aren't you?
That's one way to look at it. So precedent setting. And so it's interesting, particularly in these times now, post COVID-19 pandemic, when the entire world is looking at how do we work from anywhere. Because I was working remotely far before, probably started since 2013. So that shift in the workplace didn't bother me as much. I didn't feel that transition in the same way. But I also imagine that there are some challenges that you may have experienced that deal with being a working mother.
So I was mommy extraordinaire. And I loved it, right? Mommy extraordinaire. I'm going to get them up. I'm going to take them in. I'm going to drop them off. And I'm going to take this wonderful commute. And it was tough. And every day was a different day. No matter how much time you built in, there are days when children have the same types of feelings and emotions that we do. They're going to take their time to eat, get up, brush their teeth. I remember the day I walked in and my daughter was not brushing her teeth. She was brushing the faucet. So that takes time. And I was in the office one day and the receptionist was 10 minutes late. And there was a supervisor who was very, very angry and did not understand why she was 10 minutes late. And I commented, stuff happens. And she said, I don't understand. And I said, because every day is a different day. And she said, well, I have a nanny. I just don't understand. And so just the difference, and it wasn't that big of an age difference, but the generational difference, just one generation away, was all the difference that made her not even be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
That was really unfortunate.
And I think it shows up in this generation a little differently. So there are probably still some of the issues around motherhood and parenthood, but I think it also is about the flexibility to sort of make my own work schedule. And that's what some of these articles were saying. Hey, I want to come in from 6 to 2 rather than everyone else when everyone else is here from 9 to 5. Or I want to come in later because I've got these other things I want to take care of. And they expect that you're okay with the disclosure of that and the transparency about that being an issue. And social justice issues are really important to the new folks coming to our workspace.
Oh, yeah.
So they're saying, hey, there is a protest downtown, so I'll see you later because that's more important than work. But also the expectation is that the workforce, the workplace, the work organization stands up for those things. So you need to, the expectation is you're going to give me time off to go participate and support these issues. Right. And as an organization, you're going to invest in the communities to help right these wrongs. So all those things are different in terms of how people see it and how they come together in a workspace, because we're all expecting a different, not necessarily outcome from the organization, but definitely a different pattern and norm in how we engage and how we talk about that. Excuse me. So maybe we can take a little deeper dive into what might be some of the challenges associated with this. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. I think when we look at the whole paradigm shift, what are the roles in the workplace? I think that brings about this level of fear. One of the articles that you mentioned, it talked about the fear of the Gen Z and the millennials in the workplace. And that's because of the other generations feeling displaced for some purpose, right? But I don't think it really matters where you are, whether you are the leader or the follower. You have to enter in a workspace with some grounded rules for yourself, whether they're values, any type of norms that you may feel that are important. That usually is what you bring into the workplace. It may be different for everybody, and that's what poses the challenge, but you have to start somewhere. So I think we have to think not so much about the role, but wherever we are, this is the starting place. This is where we come in.
Interesting. And so when I think about the roles and the starting place, something that stands out to me that is a common issue in any organization, and we hear about this all the time. In universities, we teach to this, people train on this, people get certified on this. I think of this, and granted, this is under the larger umbrella of D&I issues, right? So diverse thinking about the workplace and equity in terms of treating people and including their perspectives and what we want this to look like. But I think this is one of those classic issues of understanding change and managing and leading change, right? And so it's people with the anticipation. So we need change leaders who recognize there are these issues around this and have a vision for how do I want all these generations to show up and work together? How do I want this new mix of understandings, this new expectation, these new norms, these new values to show up in a cohesive space that makes people feel included, makes people feel valued? And so if we don't have leaders in the space who recognize this as an issue and who are proactive and begin to have the conversations with all of the generations and the meeting of the minds to talk about what's our vision for how this looks and how we respect each other's values around work, and how do we give Wendy time to do those things that are important to her while she still achieves the objectives that we need? How do we give Lonnie the space to go support the causes, and then that we double back and support those causes as well to really help, right? Because the expectations of work are changing.
Yes.
And so it's not just that you have to be the change manager in the organization or the change leader that's designated from the organization. It's these principles of change that you need to understand, even as you're a new person coming into it, that you're going to meet people, you're going to encounter people who think differently than you. And so helping to break this mold, and right. And so organizations aren't always as nimble. And so sometimes we've got, as you mentioned, these norms, these behavioral norms, these practices that are rooted in tradition of what we've been doing all the time. And so someone new, and it might not just be someone new, but someone who thinks differently says, as the young lady said in the article, why do I need to be here past 2:00 if all my work is done?
That was funny. Yeah. I finished all my work.
I know what the tasks are. I completed all the tasks. There are other things in life that I want to do now. Thank you very much for excusing me and appreciating me sharing that with you. And I'll post pictures on Instagram so you can like the thing I'm going to when this work thing is over. Right. And that's an expectation about being your whole self and being able to share that part of you, that it's not, I need to, and I won't say that I did this or that you did this, but I know I've heard stories of this. Let me make up a story about why I need to leave right now so I can get these 3 hours to go do X.
Right.
And the new professionals entering our workspaces are saying, I'm not going through that energy. When I come in, I'm going to tell you, I'm leaving at 3 because I want to be at this function. Thank you very much. I'll see you. And my work will be done at 2:30 so I can walk from this place to the parking lot to get in my car. And then I'll see you tomorrow.
It's given a new meaning to work-life balance. Are we even going to need that term anymore? As we move forward, the more we master inclusivity, the work-life balance challenge should begin to disappear. This should begin to disappear. You should never have to make the choice. It should be built in. And even from the articles, what we're seeing is the requests that are now coming in, while they may be surprising, now it may not look that way later on. What the pandemic showed us is that there are different ways to work from anywhere.
And everybody knew that already.
Yes.
Right? But the traditionalists in the organization didn't want that. What do you mean? Right. You can do this job sitting at your computer at your own house rather than at this computer at this office that I rent, right?
Yeah. It did work. And they made it work.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think some of the mitigation strategies for this would look like?
So when you talk about change, I mentioned kind of managing change, but also leading change. So that's really important. But I think there's something else here that helps us strategize through this. Excuse me. And it really is about how these ideas are socialized. And we don't talk about organizational socialization very frequently, right? So really, you think about how people are oriented and then sort of move through it. But the ideas that people are bringing out, and sometimes what we're reading, these aren't things that people are saying once they're hired. They're saying these things in an interview.
Yeah.
Right? They're saying, hey, I want you to know this is an expectation I have.
That was me.
Right. So before I even say yes to this job, I want to let you know that I expect to be able to work from home. I expect to be able to leave when I want. But we're seeing companies do that, right? So we're seeing this dissipation of, PTO. So we don't have a PTO bank anymore. Just take the time that you need, come in. We're seeing this 24-hour work clock where you don't have to be at any time, or in some organizations, we looked at the stuff with Menlo Park, where you don't even have a designated work team. You pick up and work with who you want or who you need to work with to get the job done. And that might be for 2 or 3 days. And then you move on to the next task and work with a group of new people. So as we are tearing down the walls of the organization, I think it's also important when you think about how do we socialize these issues of people having different expectations of how they show up, how they participate, how they pull back, and how they share the load, and how they take on new work, and how they communicate with you about those things. And it has to be socialized in a way that is understood as part of our broad understanding, our broad perspective. You mentioned it as an inclusive function for us. So that isn't when Lonnie comes into this new space and he says, well, I don't work on Thursdays or Friday. That's a shock for everyone. Right. Well, hey, that's just, you know what? Well, Wendy doesn't work on Thursdays or Friday either. Maybe you guys can commute together.
Inviting,
for 3 days,
yeah.
Right. So it just is part of the natural conversation of what we do. The other thing that always stands out to me, and no matter what organization I'm working with, what professionals I'm coaching, this comes up often because it is such an underutilized common tool. That's it. Doing a group or team charter. Right? Establishing some common rules for each other. This is our work group. Here's what we expect of each other. Here's how we solve problems. Here's how we move agendas. Here are the things that trigger us to reset when we need to do that. It is so common for people to misfire because of these generational differences, these misunderstandings, and how we communicate about what's happening. And particularly talking about generations, right? So I've got some nephews who are in this generation who only communicate through text.
Oh, I know.
So no matter what the issue is, you're never going to talk to them. You're never going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So whereas my generation still sees text as very casual, this is really dominant as how we communicate about everything. And so the expectations of how we socialize ideas, communicate about ideas, and support each other in all of these things, that has to be established. And what I love about using group charters, so establishing rules and identifying pet peeves and processes for speaking to people outside of your group or inviting people into your group, is that it's a dynamic activity, right? So it changes, it evolves as your group evolves. As new people come into the space, they get a chance to contribute and add their language and their expectation and their values, and you reshape it together. How does this fit our new group makeup? But those things are important, and people don't use that. And so what you have is all these ideas that are crashing against each other because we don't have the understanding of how we want to move as a smaller group. So imagine if you've got multiple groups of different generations who are working without those guidelines for themselves, what's happening within the organization.
I tell you, I know a friend of mine who works under a charter for their team. Mm-hmm. And one rule that they have is no emails after 6 and not before 7. So there's no need to check the emails in the night to prepare you for what's. There's no emails sent. The weekends, they're off. And I really thought, so every industry may not be able to do that, but the fact that they saw that there were challenges and they needed to put these rules, and everyone, like you said, it is a dynamic exercise because everyone sits down and contributes. Mm-hmm. It's not one person setting the rules. And it has worked for them. And so where people think you're 24 hours connected to this little baby right here, no, that's not the case. And I also wanted to go back to your comment about how important inclusivity is. And it's going to start with conversations and collaboration. How do we do that? Read this article. So if we just begin by asking ourselves this one question: how do we elevate the consciousness of building relationships? So there was this article by Michelle Hicks, and she shared Ella Bell's formula: performance plus relationship equals advancement. Now, thinking about leveraging, leveraging all the multiple generations in the workforce, what she's basically saying here is we focus so much on performance that we don't take that time to nurture any of the relationships. It's just about getting to the bottom line. How do we get to the bottom line? Show up at 9.
Task orientation, right? Yeah. Task oriented.
Just work. We're just working. never really developing anything. Everything that we don't like or is different is bad. That's the perception. And so how do we advance? We can't. And there is an importance in taking time to nurture the relationships, to build a rapport with the people that you work with, to not come with biases and try to think that you have to live them out because that's what you brought to work with you. But get to know the people that you're working with and have the conversations, because one of the things that we're learning is that research is showing us that, guess what? Gen Z, millennials, all of the things that were taboo in the workplace, they want to have those discussions. They want to talk about politics. They want to talk about anti-racism. This is a part of the conversation, and companies can help by asking, if this is important, what can we do? In one of the articles that you said, I thought was really good, was when one of the managers said, hey, one weekend, nobody ever calls her. It was a small organization, but nobody ever calls her on the weekend. And the question was, George Floyd was killed. What are you doing about this? How are we going to show some type of solidarity with the killings that are going on? What is it that we're going to do? And it made her think. And as a result, she hired consultants that specialized in diversity, equity, and inclusion, built a program out. Rather than make a rash decision and comment, took the time out to do it the right way, involve the teams, leaders of the teams, and it was a great success. It was a great success. As a matter of fact, there have been other organizations that have modeled after that.
So let me tell you why I love this. What I love about the new generations entering the workforce is that they are disruptors.
Yes.
And we need that. And we see the success of disruptors in industry, right? We see how Airbnb changed what it means to get lodging. We see what Uber and Lyft have changed, what change means to have transportation. And other companies are doing that. So what we're seeing from young people who are entering these traditional spaces, these workspaces, that they are behavioral disruptors.
Yeah.
That the way you used to think about this, we don't have to think about it that way. And I'm okay with you knowing that I feel differently than you.
Right.
I'm okay with you knowing that I'm going to act differently than you. I am not intimidated by the boss. I am not intimidated by hierarchy. I am not intimidated by rules. What I think you're doing is stupid. So we're going to do this differently. And we need disrupt, because we get disruptors often, right, in tech stuff. We don't often have behavioral disruptors in organizations that help us rethink how we work, help us rethink how we write policy, help us rethink how we collaborate. We see it sometimes. We know that's in literature. We know that people are training on those things. You can get certification on all these, right? Remember all these assessments about how the behaviors and how those interact, right? Those things we've done all of our entire career. But these young people, these extraordinary professionals are saying, I don't even need that.
Right.
Because if you don't accommodate me, I can leave this job and with all the things in the gig economy, make just as much or more sitting at home, talking about it on whatever platform I want.
That's right.
So saying you need to move at my pace, and
Yeah.
I'll do what you need, but you have to be amenable to this. And that's the beauty of having new people, new minds, new thought processes, new professionals into the space to shake us up. Because I know I need that, right? After a certain amount of time, you just get you're on autopilot.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been doing, I know, and we talk about this often. I know how this day is going to work. I know Tuesday goes to about 10, right? So you know these things will work, and people are saying, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we don't always think of it because we are so accustomed to the system we have and the regimented schedule. So I love disruptors. I love disruptors.
Welcoming that voice.
Yeah.
Welcoming that voice, and organizations doing a better job to allow them to have that voice for the common good. So that means creating a psychological safety for them in that environment, making sure that because they're using their voice, that there is no repercussions for doing so. Having the openness, so everyone doesn't have to agree, but teaching each other how to enact productive disagreement. It's okay. And we need to have these conversations, but I need to feel safe in my environment in doing so. Will you allow that? And that's what the new voices, as opposed to the fear, that's what the new voice brings to the workspace. I wanted to also go over some of the maybe 4 of suggestions and recommendations of what this looks like in the workplace. And one would be for organizations to establish a collaborative culture. It doesn't matter how you accept it, because most of the change is from the bottom up. So allow that space to happen. Make potential applicants aware of your culture. Let them know just how it is. It goes back to what you said. No Thursdays? Okay. We know how that's going to work. Design efficient onboarding processes. Right.
You say it again. Scream that from the mountaintop.
Including mentorships, so people don't feel alone. This is how we begin to nurture the relationships from the beginning. I'm going to go back to a really old movie, but it is one of my favorites. I laugh at it. Christmas time is when you want to just go and find it. I think it was 9 to 5. It was the name
Dolly Parton, right?
Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
That was the change in the workplace. That was hilarious.
Those were disruptors right there.
But those were disruptors. And so we don't have to demonize Gen Zs and millennials when they show up. We need to embrace that and open that up for them. Some of the tactics and techniques that we're used to doing and standing firm on because they've worked in the past, they no longer work. Give it up and begin to model the way. Set the example. Leaders in the organization, it doesn't matter whether you're an exemplary leader. It doesn't depend on your roles and where you are. Model the way from that point of view. Those are some of the things that you can do. Even inspiring, encourage them to have the voice. So what does that do? We talk about we embrace diversity, and when it shows up, we're afraid.
So it's not diversity; it's divergence, right? So it's divergent. Yeah, it's here's how we attack it.
Yeah. And so that's different, but inspire them and enable them to act and celebrate. So learn to celebrate the collaborative efforts that have been successful. Let those be models in the organization for others. I mean, I looked at my friends, no emails after 6. Woohoo! Yeah. And some people might say, oh, that'll never work. It did work. And what it did was it gave people that time for that mental health break. And then maybe they don't have to take a day off.
Perhaps.
Just stop. Just stop for a minute. Just pause and have that family time.
Yeah. And that's good. You get to build those things in, right? And so you're talking about establishing new norms so that everybody fits here. And I like what you said about culture, because we see that these disruptors are shifting cultures, or at least they are pushing up against the culture, right? And
challenging the process.
Challenging the culture, saying there's room for me here. I see how you work, but you can also include how I work. There's something to be said about that level of transparency. And I love that you talked about us not operating in fear for this, because if you're not in the tech space, which is seen as very fluid and flexible, there can be lots of fear, right? We are cautious. We move slow, particularly. And so we're in higher ed. Absolutely. The learned are the slowest of the moving, right? And so we are we are not risk prone. We are risk averse in most cases. So these things seem risky. These new behaviors, these new ideas seem risky to the other generations that have already established, here's how we work together in this space. And so accommodating someone else's new expectations, new values, new norms, and new roles is hard, because we have to give up something. That's what it feels like. We have to give up something to accommodate that. And it doesn't have to be so transactional, right?
Right. Nor should it.
Right.
Nor should it. I'm loving this conversation. This is just, it really takes me back to where, if more people had done this, in our society at the time that we were millennials, it would have been more accepting. But because that support wasn't there, it wasn't as well received incrementally. I just remember the whole work from home issue being such a big deal. And yet technology always allowed it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about multitasking, right? So this is another thing that I started seeing with younger professionals coming into spaces. When I was unit director with multiple offices, multiple people, had lots of young people who were working for us. And there were other people who are leaders in the space who were uncomfortable when you would see a 20-something who would have their designated work computer, but always worked from their personal computer and had their laptop and the phone, so multitasking from 3 screens, and we're always concerned that maybe work isn't getting done. And I was always saying, but we can manage what's happening. I can see a dashboard of all the productivity that's here, and we all operate on like web-based functionality, right? So you don't have to do the work at this specific computer. I can go into any computer in any office and sign in with my credentials and do it. So why can't you do that on his computer? And so it was this level of discomfort around not doing what the traditional work responsibilities or work role looked like, right? Typically people sit at their desk, at their cube, you work from the computer you were assigned, and that was it. But to see someone working from the phone, particularly with how your phone can now be integrated with your mobile and also with your laptop. So you can be managing multiple. I do this very, very often. You imagine, like I have 4 screens up right now. You can manage multiple things with multiple screens because of how technology allows us to integrate that, right? That goes back to the earlier idea of the vision of change leadership. How do you foresee how all these pieces fit together? How do you manage those processes for people and help them understand and accommodate the newness, the freshness that's coming out? Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff, Dr. Morris.
So you mentioned something to me earlier that I want to make sure that we don't forget here, that there are some standards that come from within when it comes to this. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, there are standards. So what we bring to the workplace, we can share. It isn't something that for us alone. If we're going to work collaboratively, there are things that we have to do in having these conversations. Part of those pillars include some of what I talked about in modeling the way. So knowing your values and your vision. This doesn't just start from the top. There's an expectation, though. Every time we work in organizations, we are dependent on the leaders to do this. We want to say tonight, not pay so much attention to the role, but pay more attention to what you do. What does that look like? Even in challenging the process, you can be creative in looking for opportunities. So for an example, I remember I was taking and interviewing the manager of a Chick-fil-A, and they had very good ratings. My question is, there's always a line here. Tell me your secret.
So when you said Chick-fil-A, the immediate thing in my mind is I've never seen one without a line, but go ahead.
Without a line. What is your secret?
Around the block.
And they have multiple generations working there. And you know what the manager said is, I allow them to do what they do best during the time that is best for them to do it.
Come on now.
And that's exactly what happened. The example that she gave me was, John likes to come in. He is responsible for cutting up all the chickens. But he wants to be home in time to take his daughter to school, and he wants to be there when she gets off the bus. So to do that, John would have to come in at 4:00, chop all that chicken up, have it prepared and ready, and then split that day, come in a couple more hours, do what he needed to do, and then be home. Yeah. And he loved it, and he did it well. And so working those hours, it was just, they put in, she initiated shifts so that would allow him to do that. It was something about just having that time to hold her hand, walk her on the bus, and be there when she got home. That was important. Yeah. And so those are the things where I'm saying, don't hold on to tradition. Yeah. We have to be able to open up, hear from the people in the workplace, the multiple generations in the workplace. How do we enable others to act? By allowing them to make choices. Let's give them choices. In one of the articles that I read was when the manager was totally unaware of a holiday. And one of the employees came up and said, for Juneteenth, we have that off, right? And he quickly said, sure, yeah, we do.
We do now.
Yeah. Had no knowledge, didn't even think twice about it, but that was important. And that celebration, just for having that day off and holiday and having the organization recognize it as a holiday when it was a floater holiday. Yeah. How about encouraging the heart? How about celebrating people? Why is it so hard to celebrate what works? It should never be. It should be a standard. It should be something that we look forward to, celebrating people. I just recently went through the interview for the accreditation process. It was the best experience I ever had. And I couldn't figure out why was this so good, because for 50 minutes, we celebrated each other. For 50 minutes, we just talked about accomplishments and collaboration and successes, everything. And do you know, until that happened, it was hard to really think about putting those pieces together. And so for companies and organizations who want to be successful, this is what the multiple generations in a workspace looks like. It looks like a family celebration. It looks like productive disagreements. Every family, everybody's not going to agree, but we in the workspace have to learn to disagree and respect the voices, give place to the voices, create that psychological safety so it's okay and you're comfortable without any retaliation for speaking up. So those are the things that I really wanted to bring across here for you.
Well, you just encouraged my heart. I'm ready to go back to work now. I think gave me some energy, even though it's after 8 o'clock at night. I'm like, well, I need to go and do something else. I feel like my day was nothing now.
Well, hold up while you do that. Do you wanna go over any high points and before we take our toast?
Well, I think you sort of give them to us, right? So encourage the heart. You said manage the change, think about the change, socialize these issues, collaborate together. Those are the ways that you play nice in the sandbox, right? It's respecting each other's differences and our values and making them part of our collaborative space, not just what each person holds on to individually. Prioritize psychological safety. And what's that fail-safe one? Do a charter, right? Get a charter for your group, a dynamic charter that everybody can work on and add their comments to, and it changes and evolves as your work group evolves.
That could be contagious.
It should be contagious. Should be contagious. Should be lined up to do that like they lined up at Chick-fil-A.
That's right. All right. So with that, we are going to toast to our young professionals, saying thank you for sharing this evening with us to understand about multiple generations in that sandbox. How do we play safe? So here's to you. You can catch us on all of our social media handles. And with that, we are going to say good evening.
Take it easy.